4:31 a.m. The Strait of Hormuz, 26 degrees north latitude, 56 degrees east longitude. The strait is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. At that width, a carrier strike group transiting at 18 knots occupies a navigational corridor that leaves approximately 7 nautical miles of maneuvering room on each side before the ship enters the shallow water exclusion zone that its hull draft requires. For a 100,000-ton vessel drawing 12 meters, the geometry of the strait is not theoretical. It is a physical constraint that cannot be altered by tactics, technology, or firepower. The carrier must go through a specific corridor. Everyone in the region has known the coordinates of that corridor for 40 years. The IRGC Navy had spent 12 of those 40 years engineering a closure concept around that constraint. At 4:31 a.m., the closure sequence activated simultaneously across 6 operational elements that had been positioned over the preceding 9 days, under the cover of what Iranian maritime authorities had designated a naval exercise in the Gulf of Oman approaches. The exercise notification had been filed with the International Maritime Organization 11 days prior. It had been assessed by U.S. Naval Intelligence as a genuine exercise with an 84% confidence level. The 16% residual uncertainty had been the basis for elevating the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group's alert posture 3 days before the transit was scheduled to begin. The first element was the mine barrier. Between 4:31 a.m. and 4:47 a.m., 14 IRGC fast patrol vessels operating in the southern approaches to the strait began deploying moored contact mines and bottom influence mines across the primary transit corridor at depths between 18 and 34 meters. The IRGC's mine inventory included a domestically produced variant of the Soviet crab bottom mine, upgraded with a combination of acoustic, magnetic, and pressure influence, fusing, that made single-influence countermeasure sweeping ineffective. Neutralizing one fuse type left 2 others active. The barrier was not designed to sink the carrier. It was designed to force the carrier to reduce speed to mine-sweeping pace, 6 knots, and to channel the formation into a narrow swept lane that would remain fixed in position long enough for the second element to achieve targeting solutions. The second element was the Shahed swarm. From 3 pre-staged positions in the Keshem Island complex and the Bandar Abbas coastal zone, 280 Shahed 136 and Shahed 131 loitering munitions were launched in 8 sequential waves between 4:33 a.m. and 5:11 a.m. Their routing was not toward the carrier. Their routing was toward the carrier's Aegis escorts, the 4 destroyers and 1 cruiser positioned in the formation's outer defensive ring. The IRGC's targeting logic was precise. The Aegis escorts were the formation's defensive architecture. Compelling them to expend their defensive resources against the drone swarm would reduce the VLS and CIWS capacity available to engage the third element when it arrived. The third element was the Noor anti-ship missile battery. 47 Noor missiles, Iran's most capable anti-ship system, derived from the Chinese C-802 with a 165-kilogram warhead and active radar terminal guidance, had been pre-positioned at 3 coastal battery sites on the Iranian shore of the strait during the exercise period. Their firing positions were within the 21 nautical mile width of the strait, placing the formation's entire transit corridor within their engagement envelope without the missiles needing to fly more than 15 kilometers. At that range, the Noor's subsonic cruise phase was so short that the SM-6's extended range engagement advantage was significantly reduced. The engagement would happen close in. The fourth element was the fast attack craft. 67 IRGC Navy Hudong and Peicap class fast attack craft, vessels displacing between 83 and 170 tons, capable of 40 knots in calm water, each carrying 2 to 4 Noor or Nasr anti-ship missiles, had been dispersed across the strait's northern shore in small harbors, coastal inlets, and behind the larger islands. At 4:47 a.m., they began emerging from their concealed positions in groups of 4 to 6, routing toward the carrier formation at maximum speed. Their individual size made radar detection difficult below 12 kilometers range. Their speed meant that 12 kilometers of closing distance required approximately 9 minutes. Their missiles, fired at close range, presented a terminal threat with almost no engagement time for the inner defense ring. The fifth element was electronic warfare, from a signals intelligence vessel positioned in international waters south of the strait, and from land-based systems on the Iranian shore. Coordinated jamming on GPS frequencies and on the Link 16 data link bands, used by the formation's CEC architecture, began at 4:31 a.m. Not full-spectrum jamming, which would have been immediately identifiable and counterable. Narrowband selective jamming, targeting the specific frequency subbands used by the GPS receivers on the carrier's navigation system, and the data link channels used for formation-wide targeting coordination. The intent was degradation, not severance, reducing the formation's navigation precision by 15 meters and its targeting coordination latency by 400 milliseconds. In a 21-mile-wide strait at 6 knots, 15 meters of navigation uncertainty mattered. In a simultaneous multi-vector engagement, 400 milliseconds of targeting latency mattered. The sixth element was the submarine. 1 Kilo class submarine, operating on battery power to minimize acoustic signature, had been positioned in the strait's southern approach corridor at a depth of 62 meters for 6 days. Its mission was not to fire first. Its mission was to be the threat that the formation's anti-submarine warfare assets were compelled to prosecute, consuming MH-60R sorties, active sonar transmissions, and tactical attention that would otherwise be applied to the surface and air threat picture. A confirmed submarine contact in a constrained waterway during a multi-vector engagement is not a secondary problem. It is an immediate priority that demands dedicated assets regardless of what else is happening. The IRGC had not built 6 elements because it expected all 6 to succeed. It had built 6 elements because a defensive network that was simultaneously prosecuting a mine threat, a drone swarm, an anti-ship missile battery, 67 fast attack craft, electronic warfare, and a submarine contact was a network operating at the edge of its cognitive and physical capacity. The design principle was not saturation in the missile sense. It was saturation in the command and control sense. The IRGC did not need to sink the carrier. It needed to force the formation to stop, turn around, or divert, and to create enough uncertainty that the transit was assessed as non-executable at acceptable risk. The USS Abraham Lincoln's strike group commander had been briefed on a variant of this concept 11 months earlier. The briefing had been prepared by the Naval War College's Wargaming Division and had used the designation Layered Asymmetric Strait-Denial. He had kept a printed copy of the briefing summary in his desk for 8 months. He had read it again 3 days before the transit. He was ready for the concept. He was about to find out if ready was sufficient. 4:31 a.m. The MH-60R Seahawk from USS Mobile Bay had been maintaining a dipping sonar search pattern in the strait's southern approach corridor since 3:14 a.m. At 4:31 a.m., the same minute the mine deployment began and the Shahed sequence activated, the sonar operator acquired a contact that correlated to the Kilo-class acoustic profile the crew had been briefed on before departure. Contact bearing 217 degrees, range 8.1 kilometers, depth estimated 60 to 70 meters, course southwest at 4 knots. The submarine was not a surprise. Its presence had been assessed as probable. What the contact confirmed was its precise position, which was 4.4 kilometers inside the formation's planned approach corridor. A kilo at that position with a full torpedo load was a threat that required an immediate engagement decision. The MH-60R crew transmitted the contact at 4:31 a.m. The formation's tactical action officer received it at 4:31 a.m. The Mk-54 torpedo was authorized and dropped at 4:34 a.m. The torpedo acquired the contact at 4:37 a.m. The submarine contact was removed from the threat picture at 4:37 a.m., 6 minutes from detection to neutralization. The MH-60R crew had already repositioned to cover the mine deployment activity, detected by the formation's forward mine countermeasure assets. The mine barrier was the formation's most operationally significant problem, and the one for which kinetic response was least applicable. You cannot shoot a minefield. You can sweep it, route around it, or accept the risk of transiting through it at reduced speed. The Lincoln Strike Group commander had trained for this choice and had pre-positioned his response. 2 MH-53E Sea Dragon mine countermeasure helicopters, embarked specifically for this transit, had been airborne since 4:08 a.m. in advance of the formation's approach to the strait. Their ALQ-141 acoustic sweep and AN/AQS-14 side-scan sonar systems had been building a bottom picture of the transit corridor since launch. At 4:31 a.m., when the mine deployment vessels began their active laying operations, both Sea Dragons were already operating in the designated approach lane. What the Sea Dragons detected between 4:31 a.m. and 4:53 a.m. was a mine barrier being laid in real time ahead of the formation's approach vector. 41 individual mine contacts were confirmed. 17 were classified as high-confidence, bottom-influence mines. The harder targets, requiring physical neutralization rather than magnetic or acoustic sweeping. The mine neutralization sequence required the formation to reduce speed and hold position, while the sweep operation cleared the primary lane. Speed reduction to mine sweeping pace was tactically the worst possible outcome in the context of the simultaneously activating fast attack craft threat. A carrier at 6 knots is a carrier that cannot maneuver away from converging fast attack craft that are approaching at 40 knots. The strike group commander did not reduce to mine sweeping pace. He ordered the formation to maintain 18 knots and route through the northern margin of the transit corridor, the 3-kilometer band closest to the Omani coastline, which the Sea Dragon sensor picture showed as clear of mine contacts to a confidence level of 94%. He accepted a 6% residual mine risk to maintain the formation's ability to generate defensive speed and maneuvering room against the fast attack craft threat. The northern corridor routing also placed the formation outside the optimal engagement geometry for the Noor coastal battery sites, which had been positioned to cover the center and southern thirds of the transit lane. It did not eliminate the Noor threat. It degraded the Noor battery's engagement geometry by approximately 30%. The Shahed swarm reached the formation's outer defensive perimeter at 4:44 a.m. 280 Shahed 136 and Shahed 131 drones, routing at 185 km per hour at altitudes between 80 and 400 meters, arriving in 8 sequential waves spaced approximately 5 minutes apart. The sequential wave timing was specifically designed to prevent the formation from concentrating its defensive effort against a single mass arrival. Each wave demanded an immediate response, and by the time the 4th wave arrived, the first wave's defensive expenditure was already sunk. The formation's response to the Shahed swarm followed the exchange ratio logic that had been developed after the Arabian Sea engagement. F/A, 18F and F-35 sea sorties from the Lincoln were assigned dedicated drone intercept tasking, using AIM-9X and 20mm cannon rather than SM-6, preserving the VLS magazine for the Noor and fast attack missile threat that the formation's planning cell assessed as the actual ship-killing layer. Directed energy systems, 2 AN/SEQ-3 laser weapon systems mounted on USS Dewey and USS Stockdale were activated for the first time in a combined operational engagement. Their magazine was unlimited. Their engagement rate against individual Shahed-sized targets at ranges up to 1 kilometer was 1 target every 4 to 6 seconds. The laser systems neutralized 47 Shaheds across the first 4 waves. The F/A, 18F, and F-35 sea sorties neutralized 134. CRAM-C IWS batteries neutralized 61. Of 280 Shaheds launched, 242 were intercepted before reaching the formation's inner perimeter. 38 closed to engagement range against the surface combatants. Of those 38, 29 were neutralized by CYWS and CRAM. 9 impacted. USS Shiloh received 2 Shahed impacts on her superstructure, both Shahed 131 variants carrying 45-kilogram warheads. The cumulative effect damaged her communications mast and a topside sensor array. She remained fully underway and combat capable. Her VLS was unaffected. USS Chaffee received 1 Shahed 136 impact on her afterdeck, a 40-kilogram warhead that disabled her after CIWS mount and caused a small fuel fire that her damage control team contained in 4 minutes. 7 remaining Shahed impacts were distributed across 3 other escorts in the formation's outer ring, none disabling any ship's core combat systems, all producing peripheral damage that damage control teams were actively addressing while the main engagement continued. By 5:09 a.m., the United States had expended $890 million in defensive assets. The figure was lower than the Arabian Sea or Pacific scenarios because the primary defensive layer against the Shahed swarm was cannon rounds and laser pulses, essentially zero incremental cost once the systems were active, rather than million-dollar interceptors. The laser's engagement cost per Shahed was approximately $9. At that exchange ratio, the IRGC's $20,000 drone was meeting an even less favorable mathematics than it had in Bahrain. The Noor coastal battery fired at 4:52 a.m. 47 missiles from 3 sites, their launch timing deliberately coordinated to arrive in the formation's engagement window simultaneously with the 4th Shahed wave, compounding the formation's defensive task at its most demanding point. The combined Aegis network, operating through the degraded Link 16 signal environment caused by the Iranian electronic warfare, was processing the Shahed 4th wave, tracking 67 fast attack craft at various closing ranges, and generating SM-6 firing solutions against 47 inbound anti-ship missiles simultaneously. The Link 16 degradation was real and measurable. CEC targeting coordination latency had increased from the nominal 90 milliseconds to approximately 490 milliseconds, a 400 millisecond penalty that affected the precision of intercept timing against fast-moving targets. The formation's electronic warfare officer had identified the jamming source coordinates from the signals intelligence vessel at 4:38 a.m. and had requested authorization for a harm engagement. The authorization required confirmation that the vessel was in international waters, confirmed at 4:41 a.m., and a rules of engagement determination that an active electronic warfare operation against a U.S. formation constituted an attack authorizing kinetic response. That determination was confirmed at 4:44 a.m. The AAR-GMER impacted the intelligence vessel's antenna array at 4:47 a.m. The GPS and Link 16 jamming ceased. The degradation window had lasted 16 minutes. During those 16 minutes, 1 targeting solution had been dropped, requiring manual re-engagement that added 22 seconds to the intercept cycle of Track 0041, a Noor missile that had used those 22 seconds to close to within 34 kilometers of USS Lincoln before its SM-6 intercept was executed. The SM-6 intercept of Track 0041 succeeded at 34 kilometers. 22 seconds of degraded targeting had reduced the intercept range from a preferred 90-plus kilometers to 34 kilometers. The degradation had been operationally significant. It had not been operationally decisive. Of 47 Noor missiles, 31 were intercepted by SM-6 during their approach phase. 12 were neutralized by ESSM at inner perimeter range. 3 closed to CIWS engagement distance. 2 were neutralized by CIWS. 1 impacted, striking USS Mobile Bay amidships with the Noor's 165-kilogram warhead, penetrating the hull above the waterline and detonating in the engineering passageway. The flooding was not immediate. It was progressive, a 3-inch crack in a structural frame that damage control teams found and began shoring at 5:03 a.m. USS Mobile Bay reduced speed to 12 knots to manage the hull stress. She remained underway. The 67 fast attack craft presented a different problem category from the missile and drone threats. They were not weapons. They were weapons platforms, vessels carrying weapons, crewed by personnel who had accepted a mission profile that their planning cell understood would produce significant losses. They were approaching at 40 knots through a strait where the formation's maneuvering room was constrained by geography. Their missiles, if fired at close range from multiple azimuths simultaneously, would generate an engagement geometry that CIWS and CRAM systems would struggle to sequence through before hull impact. The formation's response was air-delivered and overwhelming. Between 4:47 a.m. and 5:19 a.m., F/A-18F and F-35. Sea strike sorties from the Lincoln engaged the fast attack craft with AGM-65 Maverick missiles, AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles, and 20mm strafing runs against the smaller vessels. The aircraft operated under direct direction from the E-2D Hawkeye, which was maintaining continuous surveillance of the strait's surface picture and providing real-time targeting to each strike sortie. The formation's 2 escort destroyers on the outer southern arc also engaged the fast attack craft with 5-inch gunfire at ranges where radar and visual targeting were both viable. Of 67 fast attack craft that had sortied from their concealed positions, 41 were rendered inoperable before reaching missile firing range. 19 diverted and reversed course following the loss of more than half their force. 7 continued their approach to within missile firing range and launched a combined total of 21 Noor and Nasr missiles before being engaged by the surface combatant's final defensive layer. Those 21 close-range missiles, fired from inside 8 kilometers, produced an engagement geometry where ESSM and CIWS had between 4 and 11 seconds to respond. 14 were intercepted. 7 impacted. 4 impacts struck USS Lincoln's hull in the waterline area. All 4 Nasr missiles, with 130-kilogram warheads, fired from a spread of fast attack craft approaching from the port quarter. The progressive flooding from 4 simultaneous hull penetrations required full damage control activation across 3 zones. The flooding was contained. The Lincoln was not sinking. She was slowing, reducing to 14 knots to manage hull stress while the damage control sequence ran. 3 additional impacts struck surface escorts. USS Bunker Hill received 1, USS Chaffee a second impact on her already damaged aftersection, and USS Stockdale received 1. All 3 remained underway. At 5:14 a.m., with the last Shahed wave intercepted and the fast attack craft threat reduced to 19 vessels in retreat, the strike group commander assessed the formation's status. 7 ships with varying degrees of physical damage. The carrier slowed to 14 knots, but navigating. The transit corridor's northern lane assessed as passable. The mine barrier's primary swept lane clear to 94% confidence. He ordered the formation to continue the transit. By 5:31 a.m., the USS Lincoln had cleared the strait's minimum width point and entered the Persian Gulf approaches. The last surface combatant cleared the strait constraint at 5:38 a.m. The strait had not been closed. At 5:44 a.m., the lead elements of Operation Gulf Access, the counter-strike package that had been pre-authorized and ready since 4:31 a.m., began engaging the Noor coastal battery infrastructure, the mine-laying vessel positions identified during the barrier deployment, and the fast attack craft bases along the Iranian shore from which the Hudong and Peykop groups had sortied. 72 Tomahawks from the formation's escorts and from a Virginia-class SSN that had transited ahead of the carrier and was now in the Persian Gulf. 16 JAS SMER from B-1B Lancers at standoff range over the Gulf of Oman. a ARGM-ER against surviving Noor battery radar systems. By 5:44 a.m., the United States had expended $1.8 billion in the combined defensive and counterstrike operation. The IRGC had expended its primary strait-denial architecture, the mine inventory, the Noor batteries, the fast attack craft force, the Shahed stockpile, the electronic warfare vessel. The assets that had taken 9 days to position and years to accumulate had been operationally consumed in 73 minutes. The strait remained open. 5:44 a.m. USS Abraham Lincoln. Flag bridge. The strike group commander watched the transit complete on the navigation display. 7 ships with damage status flags active on the formation status board. The carrier at 14 knots with progressive flooding in 3 compartments, all controlled. The formation was in the Persian Gulf. It had not stopped. It had not turned around. It was combat effective at reduced capacity across several vessels, and it was now in a geographic position from which it could generate strike sorties in every direction that mattered. He noted the transit completion time in the operations log. He did not add commentary. The display showed the formation's position. That was the commentary. Time from first mine deployment detection to completion of straight transit. 67 minutes. Time from first Shahed wave to last intercept. 48 minutes. Time from first Noor launch to last intercept. 31 minutes. Total IRGC assets committed. 280 Shahed drones, 47 Noor missiles, 21 close-range Nasr missiles from fast attack craft, 41 confirmed mine contacts, 67 fast attack craft, 1 Kilo submarine, 1 electronic warfare vessel, Kilo submarine, rendered inoperable at 4:37 a.m. Electronic warfare vessel, antenna array rendered inoperable at 4:47 a.m. Fast attack craft, 41 of 67 rendered inoperable before missile firing range. 19 retreating. 7 engaged and neutralized after missile launch. Mine barrier, 41 contacts confirmed. 17 high-confidence bottom mines being neutralized by post-transit sweep operations. Noor coastal batteries, all 3 sites engaged by Gulf access counterstrike. 2 of 3 confirmed inoperable. Shahed, 242 of 280 intercepted. Overall IRGC systems neutralization rate across all categories, 79.4%. Physical effects on U.S. formation. USS Lincoln. 4 waterline hull impacts. Progressive flooding in 3 zones controlled. Speed reduced to 14 knots. Transit complete. Damage assessment ongoing. USS Mobile Bay. 1 Noor impact amidships. 3-inch hull crack shored. Reduced speed underway. USS Shiloh. 2 Shahed superstructure impacts. Communications mast damaged. Combat capable. USS Chaffee. 2 Shahed impacts. After CIWS disabled. Fire controlled. Combat capable. USS Bunker Hill. USS Stockdale. 1 Shahed impact each. Peripheral damage. Combat capable. Total formation impacts 11. Ships removed from combat capable status 0. Counterstrike munitions deployed 72 Tomahawk, 16 JASSMER, 14 AARGMER, 28 JDAM against fast attack craft bases. Total engagement cost including defensive interceptors, laser operations, and counterstrike, $1.8 billion. The IRGC had built a strait-denial concept around a correct operational insight that the carrier's navigational constraint created a fixed engagement geometry that asymmetric systems could exploit. The concept had produced 11 impacts across 7 ships. It had not closed the strait. It had not stopped the transit. It had not removed a single ship from combat-capable status. The gap between the concept's intended outcome and its actual outcome was not the mine barrier, which had forced a routing decision. It was not the Shahed swarm, which had produced the most physical impacts. It was the sequence decision the strike group commander had made at 4:39 a.m. to route through the mine-clear northern lane at 18 knots rather than slow to sweeping pace. And what that decision had denied the Noor battery and the fast attack craft about the formation's position and speed for the following 31 minutes. The northern corridor had not been in any IRGC model. It had been in the strike group commander's printed briefing copy. He had known about the northern corridor before the transit. The IRGC had not known he knew. 67 minutes. The strait had not closed.